Welcome to Men's Bible Study with Trinity Baptist Church.
Good to see you guys this morning. We look again. I guess we should call this lesson Grace Giving number 2, because we had that last week. I would like to combine the two, but they're really too long to do that. And so if this is a little shorter, you promise not to gripe? Okay, I'm going to hold you to your word. Paul has been talking to the Corinthians, not just immediately, but for a long time, about an offering for the saints at Jerusalem. There was a famine in that part, and of course Christians, Jews who would become Christians, would not be the most popular market people. And so there was a real need for that. And Paul could see several things in this as we look at this. Scripture number 1, verse number 1, it's a purpose for me to write to you about this ministry. And this ministry is the word diakonos, which means a free work. This is something we do because we want to, not because we have to. Most times in here, there are 3 different words that are used for service, and one of them is the word for deacon. But we need to know that the word deacon, noun, comes out of the working of this, and it's something that is given and given freely, with or without reward. It's done. Now, a slave has to do it. A deacon does not have to do it, but chooses to do it. The other word we'll get to later in here, because it has to do with another type of work. But what Paul is saying is we need to give to them. Now, a year before, apparently, Paul had talked with the Corinthians, and they had promised a bountiful gift. Now Paul uses this when he went to Macedonia and talked with them. Now, just so we know what we're talking about, Macedonia and Achaia, that's like 2 different states. It's not Macedonia. The cities there that we talk about would be Thessalonica and Berea and Philippi. And the southern part, and Achaia, the state, I don't know what they call them, provinces, but it was divided into 4. Corinth was in Achaia. So when he talks about Macedonia, he's talking about the northern part. When he talks about Achaia, he's talking about the southern. So just so we'll know that we're not talking about different cities, but different places. And when he went to the Macedonians, that is at Philippi and Thessalonica and Berea, he used the fact that the Corinthians had promised a very liberal gift. And so the Macedonians had made a very liberal gift. And the Corinthians had done nothing. Why? We don't know. There's several explanations about the Judaizers draining off from him and making Paul look like he was a deceiver, taking up personal money, but we don't know all of that. But Paul says, I don't need to write to you about this ministry to the saints. You know what it's about. Now, this ministry will accomplish a number of things. One, it will tell the Jews in Judea that the Gentiles are Christians like they are and care about the whole kingdom as they send money back to them for their relief. Also, it will help Paul to know as he goes back, because not everyone was thrilled about Paul going to foreign countries and Gentiles and bringing them into the kingdom. But when he comes back with money, that solves a lot of problems, doesn't it? But when he comes back with money for the relief of them, everybody looks good. Everybody feels good about it. Feel good about Paul, feel good about the Gentiles, and they begin to accept each other. In fact, it helps to unite the whole kingdom or the whole church about him. So the ministry to the saints is a willing ministry, and in this case, it happens to do with money. And Paul says, I'm appealing to your hearts now, not to your necessities, but to your hearts. This is a thing that where you give. If you put it on paper, you'll never give. If God can reach your heart, there's really no limit to what you feel like you can do for him. And so Paul is urging them with a heart's appeal. And in the first five verses here, I broke it down into kind of a sermon that Paul made. Verses 1 through 5, your giving will provoke others to give. Now, there are always people in every church I've been who didn't flaunt what they were, but it became obvious with their willingness that they encouraged others. I'm thinking of a guy when I was at Fresno. Dad, you remember Miller's first name?
Harry? Oh, no.
Harry's father. Glenn Miller. No.
Well, that was
Yeah.
all I knew was Mr.
Well, Mr. Miller, but he was a magician. He had a store, but he was such a giver. Now, this became obvious. We did Together We Build program, and Together We Build program, the leader, the guy who's heading, the layman who's heading this, gives a testimony of what he's going to give. And then the pastor has to do the same thing. Now, nobody knows what Mr. Miller makes. So was his gift a sacrificial or not? Well, when he got up, he said, our friend, we're going to give $40 a week. We're talking about 1976. That's and I'm thinking, good, now he's going to make me look like a cheapskate. But on the other hand, everybody then, not now, but everybody then knew what the pastor made. It was in the church financial report every month. And so I said, I'm going to give $25 a week. Now, why not a month? No, a week. Sounds smaller. You know, the old saying, by the inch, last inch, by the yard, it's hard. If I'd said $100 a month, I probably couldn't have done it. But $25 sounds easier. But Harry, wasn't not Harry, but Harry's father, Mr. Miller, not only that, but anytime you went out, if you went to eat, he always made sure he was the one that got the check. I mean, he just was a guy that giving just was part of him, and this rubs off. This helps others to do that. And so Paul is using this about the Macedonians to Corinthians as he'd used the Corinthians to the Macedonians. One guy's giving provokes others to do something that they weren't sure they could do. I know I'd heard tithing testimonies before I began to tithe, and I thought it was impossible until I began to do it. We'll not go into how I did. But Paul used their zeal. And so as we go through this, I know your readiness, which I boast to the Macedonians, namely that Achaia, that is Corinth, has been prepared since last year. You made a promise last year. And I have sent the brethren that are boasting about you. Paul now is sending people from Macedonia to Achaia, to Corinth, to collect the money. And he said, I've sent the brethren boasting about what you're going to give, and you don't want to show up empty when they get here. That's a little bit of psychology, I would say. But I'm saying I want you to be prepared for this. Now, how do you prepare? You prepare by giving a little bit at a time. Let's just say if I'm going to give some $500 a year to something, I don't wait until December 31st and write a check for $500. That's hard to do. But if I give $500 a year, how much a week would that be? $10? Yeah, that's not that tough. And so Paul is saying this, and he said the same things to the Corinthians. I think in chapter 1, verse 16, he said, lay aside on the first day of the week, lay aside what you're going to give, a little bit at a time, not the whole thing. And so he used that. So I thought it necessary to urge the brother to go ahead and arrange beforehand your previous, in verse 5, bountiful gift. Now the word bountiful in here, what do you have? Is there a different word? Generous. The Greek word is the word we translate eulogy. Now what is a eulogy? When you get up at a funeral, you tell the best things about those folks. And so what he's saying is, we want your gift to be something we can talk good about. A blessing. A blessing would be perhaps a better word than bountiful. But the word that is here is the word that for eulogy. And so we want you to have a eulogy gift, a bountiful gift, a grace gift, and it might be ready as a bountiful gift, not affected by covetousness, not keeping it, but we want you to have good doing it. And so the first principle of giving is it will provoke others to give. Then the second principle, in verses 6 to 11, your giving will bless you. You believe that, man? I'm talking to the choir now. When I look at you, I think you, excuse me, but I see you as the elite of the church. Not all of the elite, but pardon me, I see you as leaders and bountiful, and so I know I'm speaking to the choir a whole lot here. But giving will bless you as you give. In Malachi chapter 3, verse 8 says, will a man rob God? And then God says, you're robbing me, but you say, how have we robbed thee? And God says, in tithes and offerings, you're cursed with a curse, for you're robbing me, the whole nation of you. And so God is talking about that, but then he says in verse 10, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and test me now in this, saith the Lord of hosts. Test me in this, saith the Lord of hosts, test me in this, and see if I will not open for you the windows of heaven. Now, what is God promising? What is God promising here? If you will, I will. But you're the one that has the door handle on your side. God said, I am ready, I'm ready, but you're not ready to get until you're ready to give. That's what God is saying. But when you're ready and you begin to give, God says, I can open the windows of heaven. Now, what are the limits God can give? In one word, none. None. He cannot give us all the way, and we know that. We pray about that. We praise him about that. But he's promising here, you give, I will give, but I'm waiting for you. Your heart needs to be right to do it. And it's a heart thing, not, hey, I'm going to give to see if God will. No, that won't get it. So your giving will bless you as your gift. In verse 6, he who spares sowingly shall reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will reap bountifully. And that's a word eulogy again. And so what you give has a way of coming back. Now, when you think of this, you think of a farmer, and the more seed he sows, the more crop he has, right? And that's the way it is. So the more you sow, the more you get. And yet, we are blessed as we give. We're blessed as we do, as we give. But also, verse 6 tells us we are blessed even as we give. Not when we give in the future, but as we give. Am I right? Is there something that occurs in your heart when you heartily give something to the Lord, to the church, or to a poor person, or buy somebody lunch? Or isn't there something that happens in you? A joy, a pleasure, a warmth that happens in you. Now, a farmer, he may not have any heart at all. He just sows. But you and I, when we sow, it's a heart thing, and it's an immediate return for us. Let each of us do in verse 7 as he's purposed in his heart to do. So this means we have to have the right motives. What are the right motives? In one word: love. Love of God, love of people, love of the opportunity to meet the needs, whatever the needs may be, the joy that comes with us. And so this comes immediately when we give, that we will have that. But we need to purpose in our heart. The farmer does not have to purpose in his heart. He just goes out and does it. But you and I, it's a heart thing. It's not, God is not saying, all right, you give and I'll give. If you don't, I don't. No, what God is saying, I want your heart. And when he has your heart and you give, you immediately begin to receive. Immediately, not just off sometime, but immediately things begin to happen in your heart. Not grudgingly or under compulsion. You don't give because you have to, you give because you get to. For God loves a cheerful giver. Now, have you ever heard what that word that's translated cheerful is in the Greek? Hilaron. We get our word hilarious from that. You give hilariously. When something's hilariously, don't you think about smiling or laughing or chuckling and enjoying a thing so much that you're really amused and thrilled by it? That's the way he says we are to give. It is to be such a joy to us that we're just elated because we can give it. Now, and so we get as we're giving, but also in beginning well, let's just read on. God is able to make all grace abound to you. Now, all grace abounding to you, that always having all sufficiency in everything, and having that means everything you need is going to be there. God is going to make sure what you need is there. He's not just talking about money, he's talking about happiness, he's talking about contentment. You can have all the money in the world and not be contented. Are there people like that? Are there people like that who have billions and do not have happiness? Yes, yes. This is a thing that brings you joy and hilarity, to be able to give, to be able to help, to be able to make a difference in church, in lives, wherever you are, with what God has given you to earn. So sufficiency in everything, you may have an abundance. You may have an abundance. How much is an abundance? Well, I guess, yeah, it's more than you need. I don't know about you, but that covers me. I can't imagine an old guy like me. And Paul reminds them from Psalms 119, he that scattereth abroad, he gives to the poor, his righteousness abides forever. And then in verse 10, now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for the food, he's looked up Isaiah 55 and 10. 55:10. Thank you, Dale. You studied this too, haven't you? And 55:10 says, For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return there without watering the earth and making it bear and sprout, and furnishing seed to the sower and bread to the eater. And so it's just not something Paul said, hey, I figured this out. No, he says this is always the way God is. It's the way he wants to be. He wants to share his love, but he wants to be loved, and he wants us to share the love as he does. So there's this enrichment in liberality. Now, the next principle is the principle your giving will meet needs. I lost the word. No. In verse 12, for the ministry of this service. Now, we mentioned service could be doulos, a slave, or service, diakonos, a work. This is the word from which we get our word liturgy. It is what a priest does. The ministry, the diakonos of this service, this liturgy, you're doing it for God. I may give it to you, but I'm doing it for the Lord. Is not only full supplying the needs of the saints, but overflowing through many thanksgivings to God. See? And so it's not just I give, they get, we're all happy. No, it overflows through many thanksgivings to God. And so our service here is our liturgy. It's our priestly obligation, or we get to do it. I can hardly imagine, and that's all I can do, back in the Old Testament, when a priest got to do a particular thing for people, like killing the animals or turning the Azazel loose or whatever it was, and the thrill there was on that day to finally do what you'd been preparing to do all year and know it's making a difference in the lives of people. And that's the thing that he's talking about. So your giving will meet needs. Now, we don't offer animals. We offer time and money and service. That's what we do. And we're to be as free with each of them as God gives us time and opportunity. So your giving will meet needs. Now also in verse 13, your giving will glorify God. Because in verse 13, because the proof of this ministry, they will glorify God in your obedience, in your confession of the gospel of Christ, and the liberality of your contribution to them all. Is not the real want in your life to glorify God, that God may be seen by others, lifted up, made you look good? It probably won't surprise you because you're like me. I've worked with all different kinds of people, and a lot of people out there see God as a big eye in the sky that just wants to zap you for everything you do wrong. Somebody else would see God as, well, all he wants is my money, and the Sundays are wasted and all of that. I've worked with them, and you have too. But our business is to show them God can be glorified in service, in money, and all. And they need to see that God is worthy of being glorified. Because most folks have no idea who God is and what God does and what God really wants to do. I could go a lot further, but you all know everything that I've said, that the idea of the world out there is different than their thoughts of God than our thoughts of God. And so when we see giving, we see an opportunity to bless God, and yet in giving to bless God, we find we bless ourselves, continually getting what we need. If it's not money or time or service, it's the joy of being able to do it. So the Jews would say, the Gentiles, glorifying God, the Gentiles not only preach salvation, but they practice what they preach, and they're sending money to us as we've always grown up with tithing. And now they're doing that. We could see how it would unite God's people. At verse 14 would tell us, they also, by prayer on your behalf, yearn for you because of the surpassing grace of God in you. The grace that just is bigger than you dreamed. So thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. What is his indescribable gift? Well, let me say who. And he entered heaven when he gave, can I do less than empty myself and discover that I can't really do that? But the more I give, the more he gives. I've often used this illustration of a funnel. You see the funnel. Which is the largest end? The part it gets. The part it gets. If it keeps flowing, you keep getting. And that's us. We're the top part of the funnel. Is that good? Now, I have been the bottom part of the funnel. but it's sure a better joy to be the top part of the funnel and know that it blesses life, it blesses God, it glorifies God, and it does something for me that's just indescribable to be able to do that. Now, that's pretty well what this lesson has to say. I know it's a continuation last week, but it's just too long to make one whole one. So if we a little earlier, I wouldn't mind somebody just giving some kind of I can't think of the word, testimony.
Our chainsaw ministry is a representation of God's faithfulness of provision. When we started the ministry in 2005, we had $0 in the bank. And every time that we went, God gave us the money on the way to the coast. Today, the amount of money that we have in our ministry is beyond what we could think or imagine. Everything that we have, God has given us. It started with a trailer. We started on a Thursday night praying for a trailer. On Sunday morning, I went to our Sunday school class and I said, would you pray with us about God providing a trailer? Sunday school was over and a gentleman walked up to me and put his arm on my shoulder and said, let's go buy you a trailer. And the next morning at 7:30, he called me and said, well, and I gave him a description because at the time I was selling cargo trailers. And the next morning at 7:30, he calls me and said, I bought you a trailer. It's brand new. Can you go to Paris, Texas and go get it? And I said, yes, sir, we can go get it. Today we have that trailer, 36 saws from 12 inch to 36. We have a man lift, and all of that God gave us. And everything that we do, I just can't tell you what it's like to walk up to people who've lost everything, and you do your service, and they say to you, we can't pay you. And we say, we've already been paid. And they say, you've already been paid? And we say, yeah. God supplied his son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross for us. And so you can't pay us. The first time that I ever went to a little lady, and we worked at her place, and Don Maltman was with us. And this little old lady came to the door with her checkbook, and she said, "I'm going to pay you." And I said, "No, ma'am, you're not." "Well, I have to." And I said, "Ma'am, you're not." And I knew that this lady was on Social Security. And she just kept on and on and on and on. And I said, "I tell you what you do. You go to your church and you give to your church." When we were in North Carolina some years ago, we always try to share the plan of salvation. And I shared the plan of salvation with a man and woman who were probably in their early 70s and their daughter who was 40. And I shared the plan of salvation with all three of those adults. And then I asked them, "Would you like to accept Jesus?" All three of them said, "Yes, we want to accept Jesus." Mm-hmm. And what they see in our ministry is God's grace. Because when they've lost everything, they're looking for hope. And when they see those chainsaws crank up, and then we tell them before they ever start, "We do this for free." And they see a part of God's grace, but they also see God's provision by providing everything that we have. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, as a 76-year-old man, I understand what God's abundant life is, because He's allowed me to live an abundant life beyond what I could ever think or imagine. I have traveled more of the world than I ever would have dreamed that I would travel. And it's because God has been faithful to do that. And, you know, my banker probably wouldn't understand if I told them that 90% goes further than 100%.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you, it works. And He's faithful. And I'm thankful that I can share that with you. What we have to do is go tell the story about what God did for us.
Absolutely. It's an amazing thing. When I was a pastor in Bellwood Park in Dallas, I asked R.G. Letourneau. You ever heard of him? And he's a guy that gives 90%. He's dead now, but he gave 90% of all that he earned. He had a college and all this dirt equipment. We called him and asked him to come to our church, and he did. Flew from Longview to Dallas. He had a B-25 that he had made into a personal plane. We made him at Love Field and took him to church, and then took him back. And we wanted to pay him. Of course, he wouldn't receive anything, but he didn't even miss a meal. But a thing I meant to say that illustrates all of this, and you'll remember this, about 2 years ago, the pastor told us that there were several counties of people who had doctor bills. Do you remember that? A lot of doctor bills that they could not pay. And the churches in this area took up an offering. Remember that? and there were certain counties that they were going to be able to cover. I think they even covered all of Bexar County by the time that we gave our offering. That's what it does. It blesses, and it goes out into places you and I will never know this side of heaven. Who that touched, how they touched, and what it meant to them. But giving is not just, okay, I give, I get. I glorify God. It just touches so many lives in so many ways that we dare not do it. Amen.
So let's begin with question number one. What is the meaning of ministry, that Greek word diakonias, to or for the saints?
Service, support.
All right. Anybody else? Freely given, right? The real Greek word means a person who serves bearing gifts. That's what it literally means, a person who serves bearing gifts. It's different from a slave. The word for slave is doulos. And this is a different Greek word, but we get our word deacon, we get our word Presbyterian from it, numerous words from it in the Old Testament. And ministry, of course, is another word that gets from it. Okay, number two, how can the giving of one person or church affect the giving of others? I'm sorry, Mike. Okay. Yep. Well, mine's the same thing. Zeal stirs people to respond in kind. So, pretty much, that's an easy one. Number three, what does it mean? Giving is not something we do, but something we are. Right.
That's the word.
I have, giving is like having a second skin. Right. Okay. Oh, number four is one of my favorite. Why is the principle of intent so essential in a Christian's understanding of we reap what we sow? Now that's in verses 6 through 10, by the way. Anybody have any idea? Especially look at verse 10. Yeah, in fact, that phrase comes from Galatians 6:10. But Paul has something a little different here, especially verse 10. Think of it. What is he sowing? What's sowing? In other words, he mentions the first thing. How do you get food? Money. Money is the seed. Money is the seed he's talking about here. This money, it buys food, and it's going to be sowed where? The poor Jerusalemites. They're poor. And Corinth has money. They don't. Yet they give willingly, and now he wants them. And that's what his idea is. That's the seed, money. So.
Sound like Oral Roberts.
Well, he didn't want them to give out of a guilt. No, he wanted to give generously because as he goes on to say, the Lord blesses a full giver is what he really says. Okay, number 5. What are some immediate blessings believers receive as they give? This is verses 11 through 15.
The joy of being part of God's work in some way.
Okay. Anybody else?
And you realize what you gave, where it came.
Right. Okay, good one. Anybody else? All right. Those are pretty good. So number 6, what does it mean to have all sufficiency in everything? That's verses 8 and 9. So what does that mean? Okay. Anybody?
And I put down to be content.
Paul is actually borrowing this word sufficiency. He's borrowing it from what in those days in Corinth there were these Stoics. These were philosophers that were going around. They were real cynics, is what they were. And he's borrowing that term from them. And what they meant by it is that one is self-sufficient. You know, I'm God, I can take care of myself. And Paul was using that term differently. He said, look, our sufficiency belongs to God. We depend upon God. But then he goes on to say, he wants the Corinthian church to be self-sufficient in materially, financially, so they're not a burden on anyone else. Plus, they're able to give. That was the purpose of being self-sufficient or being sufficient. We depend upon God. God blesses us. He gives us enough that we can give others. That's the idea. So, that was number 6. Number 7, in what way is giving a ministry of service? That's verses 12 and 13. In what way is giving a ministry of service? Is it a civic obligation? Is this some civic? No, it's not. So why do we give? Well, that's true. There's something even deeper here that Paul has in mind. Okay, part of it. And by doing that, you do something that a lot of people don't quite understand. You are actually worshiping. Mm-hmm. You're worshiping.
The word liturgy comes from.
That's right. That's what it means. You're worshiping and you're giving thanks to God by doing that. By doing the very things that Rick talked about, that Phil just talked about. All those are acts of worship.
You're changing that tire for that. You are actually worshiping.
That's right. Number 8, what does it mean that the Christian life is one of abundance? This is verses 13 through 15. Anybody? Okay. What else?
We always have all we need. Give out, give. That's all we need.
Right. Well, giving, the idea here is that giving is a witness. Giving is a witness of God. Whenever we give abundantly or just a little, that shows that God is there. That's the idea. Anybody else? Okay, number 9. and this is verse 14, by the way. How does sharing the gospel work together with meeting practical needs?
I think we see that through many different ministries. As you're ministering, whether it's practical or whatever, you may be opening the door to present the gospel to someone else.
Yeah, good one. Perfect.
You can give a man a fish, or you can eat him. So sharing the gospel, we share life lessons through God's word, and it helps to reduce their wants and needs.
Perfect. All right. Can't top that. All right, number 10. Oh, by anyway, anybody else have anything? All right, number 10. How did giving unite the Jews and Gentiles in that day? And the second question, how might giving unite believers within the local body and among different churches today?
In the original case, it was the Jewish believers saw that the Gentiles giving their funds to them, that they were all Christians, but the Jewish and the Gentiles were taking care of them. Going forward, I think that it's like when we help the church that's down in Rockport, that brings us all together because we're all.
Yeah, that's right.
And just as we were talking about earlier, about all the churches getting together to pay off medical bills, being united, even though in a small way, and something that needs to be already paid, united all the churches in the area.
Yeah, perfect example.
Paying bills also.
That's right. Perfect. That's right. That is the answer, by the way.